Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hi friends, welcome to my video column, and we know that the parliament session is going on. Around a dozen Rajya Sabha member of parliaments were suspended from the winter session on the first day of the session itself. The members were suspended for their unruly conduct towards the end of the monsoon session, which had taken place in August. And at that time, the marshals were called after some of the opposition members had stormed the well of the house during the passage of the General Insurance Business Nationalization Amendment Bill 2021. Now, these dozen members which have been suspended, they include 6 members from Congress, 2 each from Trinamool Congress and Shiv Sena, and 1 each from CPI and CPM. We are not going to go into detail of this suspension, but largely we will take this as a context, or we'll take this as a reference point, and we'll talk about a larger issue, that is the level of parliamentary debates or the behavior within the legislatures by our elected representatives, and especially the level of the parliamentary debate. There has been a lot of concern about this, that the level of the parliamentary debates has gone down considerably. And in that context, we are going to look at one of the finest debates, one of the fiercest, one of the finest, one of the most aggressive debates which took place in our parliamentary history, but about which we don't talk much. Interestingly, this debate took place in 1951. On 12th May 1951, the first amendment to the Constitution was introduced. It restricted the aim of the objective of this first amendment was to restrict some of the fundamental rights such as freedom of speech and right to hold property, amongst others. It also aimed to create the 9th schedule, which many experts termed as the constitutional vault. Why they called it the constitutional vault? Because, to put it broadly, the laws put in the 9th schedule couldn't be challenged judicially, or one may say the right to scrutinize any law by the judiciary was restricted by this 9th schedule, which was supposed to be introduced by the first amendment. So the debate that took place on the first amendment is, as I mentioned, one of the finest debates which has taken place, and it was one of the greatest verbal duels which took place between Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who is considered to be a very good orator, and another brilliant orator, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee was unofficially the leader of opposition, and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was the Prime Minister at that time. So we'll start how this debate took place. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru started this debate, and as soon as he started, he went hammer and tongs against, guess what? He went hammer and tongs against the press and the media. Now, this debate actually, as we will go ahead and we'll talk about who said what, it will also bring a lot of myths that Nehru was a libertarian, whereas the opposition, the Bharatiya Janasangh, it was more conservative. In fact, if you go into the speeches which took place during this debate, then you will find that it was actually the opposition led by Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, which was defending the liberty, or which was, you can say, which turned out to be more libertarian, and Nehru appears to be very, very authoritarian. So this is a very interesting takeaway from this debate also. But we'll focus on largely the quality of the debate and who said what. So I quote from what Nehru said in his speech, and he's talking about press. "It has become a matter of great distress to me to see from day to day some of these news sheets which are full of vulgarity and indecency and falsehood. Day after day, not injuring me or this house, but poisoning the minds of the younger generation, degrading their mental integrity and moral standards." Now, very significantly, what Nehru says, "It is not for me a political problem what is getting printed in the press about his government." So he says, it is not for me a political problem, it is a moral problem. And see the irony that it is a Congress, and which accuses very often the opposition, the BJP, which is actually basically a successor of Bharatiya Janasangh, and Bharatiya Janasangh was founded by Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. So it's very interesting that Nehru is talking about it's more like moral policing. Nehru wants to do moral policing. So he says that it is not for me a political problem, it is a moral problem. And Nehru then ended his speech with a brave attempt to justify the First Amendment, which was facing stiff opposition from, interestingly, not only his political rivals but also from within his party ranks. And it was approximately a 75-minute long speech which Nehru gave. And in his concluding remarks, Nehru says, and he has put it quite aggressively. He says, with social and economic conditions, you, I and the country has to wait with social and economic conditions, and we are responsible for them. He thundered how we are to meet them, how we are to answer them. How are we to answer the question that for the last 10-20 years you have said we will do it? He's saying that people are going to ask this thing from him and his government if he doesn't get the First Amendment passed. So then he goes on to say, people will ask, why have you not done it? It is not good for us to say. We are helpless before fate and the situation we have to face at present. So that is why Nehru wanted to change this fate and the situation by bringing the First Amendment. Now Mukherjee stood up to counter Nehru's speech. And he deconstructed it. He actually almost literally, you can say, destroyed Nehru's speech on the floor of the House. And he was so powerful that not only when he had finished his speech, he got an ovation not only from the opposition benches but also from the treasury benches. So many Congress MPs gave him a big round of applause. In fact, Congress MP N.G. Ranga, who later on formed the Swatantra Party also, and but the N.G. Ranga, he described Mukherjee's speech as one of the most powerful and eloquent speeches he had ever heard. Ranga termed Mukherjee as the Indian Burke, after the great British parliamentarian and conservative philosopher Edmund Burke. And Times of India, which reported next day on this great speeches, the great verbal duel between Nehru and Mukherjee. So it said that Mr. Nehru's sentiment was more than outmatched by the impassioned logic of Dr. Mukherjee. And now to give you a glimpse of, I have talked about what Nehru said. So to give you a glimpse of Mukherjee's brilliant oratory and impassioned logic, as Times of India also said, I quote from his speech. So I am giving you a quote from what Mukherjee said. He, addressing the Prime Minister and addressing the House, he said, you can pass a law. It's basically what he's saying is aimed at the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. You can pass a law and say that the entire task of framing, interpreting and working the Constitution will be left in the hands of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, assisted by such people whom he may desire to consult. You are treating this Constitution as a scrap of paper. So this is what Mukherjee said. And Mukherjee ended his speech with stirring remarks that talked about this encroachment on the liberty of the people of free India, because the one of the key tenets of First Amendment was restriction in the freedom of speech also. So he said, I quote again, from the saddest epitaph which can be carved in the memory of a vanished liberty is that it was lost because its possessors failed to stretch forth a saving hand while yet there was time. So this is how he concluded his speech. Now this bill was referred to select committee, and then as soon as the select committee within 3-4 days gave the report, and the bill was again taken up finally for enacting it into a law. Then another fierce encounter took place between Nehru and Mukherjee, and also some of the other stalwarts also spoke. So another stalwart who spoke brilliantly from the opposition benches was Acharya Kripalani. It was full of wit and sarcasm, and I to give you a glimpse of the level of speeches which were made. So I'll quote Acharya Kripalani, and very sarcastically he is getting back at Nehru, saying, we are accused of idol worshippers, but by who are we accused? I am sure the greatest beneficiary of this idol worship is our Prime Minister, and also, may I add, this government. But for this idol worship, this government would have fallen at least 20 times during the course of the last 3 years. So this is how Acharya Kripalani spoke. Another interesting anecdote, there was a famous Anglo-Indian educationist, Mr. Frank Anthony, who reluctantly voted in favor of the bill, and he made a very brilliant remark during his speech. So I quote from Mr. Frank Anthony's speech. The only way to stop the inevitable ultimate dictatorship, that is communist dictatorship, is the dictatorship of Jawaharlal Nehru. But because I believe that a dictatorship today is the only way to prevent a later dictatorship, I am prepared to give blanket powers to Jawaharlal Nehru. This is the only reason for supporting these amendments completely. So this is what Mr. Frank Anthony said. Now Mukherjee, who again spoke on this bill before it was put to voting, so he again spoke brilliantly. Again there was a fierce encounter. One of the finest verbal duels took place between Nehru and Mukherjee. And Nehru, I can say that Nehru was far outmatched by Mukherjee. Mukherjee was far superior, but still the level of verbal duel was very high. So I quote from what Mukherjee said. You cannot pass or amend a constitution to fight with ghosts, he was telling Nehru, and he likened Nehru to the Prince of Denmark fighting imaginary troubles in the Shakespeare's Hamlet. So you see the level of debate which was taking place. And in the final verbal duel, this Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru got so charred up that shaking his fists in fury, he challenged his opponents, saying, "We are ready to combat everywhere intellectually or any other kind of combat on this issue and every other issue." So, and Nehru was shaking his fists. The fierce and acrimonious debate, but brilliant, you can say, parliamentary debate, lasted for almost, speakers after speaker spoke on this, and for several days this debate took place. I have only took out few nuggets because of the time constraint. So finally this debate came to an end on May 31, 1951 at 6:40 p.m. when the speaker called for vote on this first amendment. The opposition was outnumbered by the ruling party. So there were 228 ayes, there were 20 noes, and there were close to 50 members which had abstained. So broadly speaking, 228 members had voted in favor of the First Amendment, 20 members had voted against it, and 50 members had abstained from this voting. So this debate, I think, can be one of the reference points which we need to adhere to, because the issue is quite contentious. And even the then President, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and the Speaker also, they've also had reservations about this First Amendment, but Nehru still went ahead with it. So that's a different matter. We're not going to the merits or demerits of First Amendment, but let's try and take a look at such debates, and probably it can help us in resetting the standard of our parliamentary debate. So this is all from our side in this episode, and we'll soon be back with another episode. Thank you for watching.